it was for me, if you're kind of a tech guy, I think it's very good. If
kinda
you're
like that.
in the medical field, you find it interesting. I got the largest 3D printer in the world to make buttons.
Now, that would be interesting to see. Okay, it is 4 o'clock, actually it's 4:02, September 25th, 2017. And we have roll call, please.
Mayor Crawford,
Here.
Commissioner Blanchard,
Here?
Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Hodges,
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Okay, if those of you who can stand, will stand. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. And I want to add to my list this week, Puerto Rico. Let's think about the people in Puerto Rico as well as Miami and West or South Texas. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Number 3, awards and proclamations.
Item 3.1, the period of September 15th through October 15th, 2017, as Hispanic Heritage Month in the city of Salina. Jesus Hernandez will read the proclamation.
Well, excuse me, but the throat's not so good today. But here's a proclamation of the city of Salina. It says, whereas American society today embraces a remarkable breadth of cultures and Hispanics are an integral part of this diversity, the Hispanic American community is a collage of distinct groups, including people with roots in Central America and South America, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Spain. And whereas Hispanics have been an important part of the history and the heritage of the Americas since the earliest days of the European colonization, and today Hispanic Americans are the youngest and fastest growing minority community in our nation, Hispanics have had a profound and positive influence on our country through their strong commitment to family, faith, hard work, and service. Hispanics bring unique perspectives and experiences to our national community and character, and whereas the vibrant Hispanic influence can be seen in all aspects of American life and culture, from distinctive cuisine to colorful festivals, and from the rhythms and melodies of traditional music to the contagious beat of today's most popular songs, and whereas throughout our nation, Hispanic men and women have distinguished themselves in every endeavor and with our cultural and linguistic ties to our trading partners throughout the Western Hemisphere. Hispanic Americans are crucial to maintaining our nation's competitiveness and prosperity in the global economy of the 21st century. And whereas Hispanic Heritage Month, whose roots go back to 1968, begins in each year on September 15th, the anniversary of the independence of Latin American countries, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And Mexico, Chile, and Belize are also celebrate their independence during this time period. Now, therefore, I, Kate Crawford, have authorized and issued a proclamation designating September 15th through October 15th as Hispanic Heritage Month. In honor of the many contributions that Hispanic Americans have made and continue to make to our nation and culture, I call upon all citizens of the city of Salina to observe this month with appropriate ceremonies and activities and programs. It is therefore unto set on my hand and caused by the seal of Salina, Kansas, to be affixed on the 18th of September 2017. Kate Crawford, Mayor.
Thank you very much, and you did a great job.
Thank you.
Do you have any activities, or is the group?
At this point, I don't know of any activities that are going on in Salina.
All right. Well, maybe somebody will come up with a
Maybe
good
somebody will come.
celebration.
Hopefully so.
We should. Okay. Thank you very much, and here's your proclamation.
Thank you.
Okay, we're down to Citizens Forum. This is a time for any citizen who would like to bring anything to the commission that is not on the agenda. We would be glad to hear you if you just leave your name and your address. No takers. Okay. We'll go on then to public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time.
Item 5.1, public hearing and report on application for a constitutional economic development tax exemption filed by the Salina Economic Development Corporation requesting a property tax exemption for the Bulk Solids Innovation Center located at 607 North Front Street.
Okay. Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. On August 28th of this year, you acknowledged receipt of an application that had been filed for a constitutional economic development tax exemption for property located at 607 North Front Street. And you referred that to the city manager and staff for an analysis of its costs and benefits and authorized us to schedule a public hearing date to consider the application. Cost-benefit analysis was prepared using Kansas Department of Commerce approved software, and based on that, city staff moved forward with setting a public hearing for today's meeting. Notice of that hearing was published and provided to both Salina County and USD 305 as provided by state law. Since that time, the applicant has determined that additional work needs to be done on their application before it is heard and considered, and they are requesting that the public hearing today be continued to a date mutually agreed upon by them and you as the City Commission. So we don't have any substantive information about the application at this time, and so I would probably turn it over to Mr. Ken Wasserman, who's representing the applicant.
Mr. Wasserman?
Thank you. We would like to continue this. Probably, ideally, 120 days, 90 days would work. We received an 11th hour notification that is going to cause us to do some more work. So
Okay.
that's the reason for the request.
Are you open for questions if there's questions
Sure.
now? Okay. Let's open the public hearing. Okay. Any questions?
I have questions of staff, but not of the applicant. So.
Anyone else have questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wassermans. Okay. I'm gonna- You have questions?
Yeah, you ready for
before
those?
we-
Okay.
Yes, uh-huh.
Quick question. Evidently, opening and a continuance does not, by statute, have any sort of guidelines as to say how many days you can. Was this not advertised in the, what wasn't part of the requirement for this to be advertised, public hearing advertised in the local newspaper?
Yes, I worked with City Clerk's office, and we published a notice of the hearing 7 days in advance of today's date, and we also delivered written notice to USD 305 and Salina County because they are also tax collecting entities, and it gives them an opportunity to know about the request and an opportunity to be heard.
And are they provided with the full breadth of information that we are? Apparently, they're putting together more information.
They are.
Will they be provided with that information? And if it is, I don't have a problem with whatever the day amount that they need to do it is, just that somehow in the spirit of letting people kind of know, we may not be required to give another notice since it's been opened and continued, but do we typically refresh people if after a certain level, if 3 months go by and they forget all about it or have no idea? Do we have a way to reach out and make sure that they're re-notified?
I would think, given if there is a lengthy continuance of this hearing, I think it would be appropriate, once that date is established, to provide re-notice to the USD 305 and Salina County, both to know the hearing date, and also if there are things refreshed in the application, then they would have an opportunity to review anything new or different that's in the application.
Okay, I appreciate that. Does council suggest that that be made part of the motion?
I think if that is the wish of the governing body, that would be helpful to have that articulated in the motion, yes.
Okay, yeah, then I don't have a problem with whatever time the applicant needs to sufficiently address whatever it is they need, so.
I would think that's a great idea, actually.
Okay. Mr. Wasserman, do you have a particular, is there a particular date that you need?
If we could do it 120 days from today, whatever that certainly work for us.
I would just, for the folks at home, indicate that the applicant had said 120 days would be a good time for them.
Okay, does someone have a calendar?
January
I do.
22nd.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Then I would consider a motion to continue the public hearing to a date of a certain January 22nd. Is that on a Monday? I'm assuming it is.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sure you wouldn't put it on Friday, but,
Before we decide, on which day would the next city commission be sworn in?
January 8th.
8th. They wouldn't want that to be
It's on-
there.
it's on my calendar.
On their first day, on their first day's business.
yeah,
That'd be January 8th, I think, is
Yeah.
the transition, yeah.
Okay.
Should be okay.
Yeah, that sounds right. So I believe the first Monday after the new year. And of course, the new year is a holiday, so it doesn't work too well, so the 8th.
And then just another date question. I'm assuming that as I recall, part of this, there was an application. The applicant would probably know best on this, and Dean. There was an application made with the state. Is that time period isn't going to cause any issues there?
No, sir, actually, we've dismissed the
Okay. Okay.
okay,
Great. Thank you.
okay.
Okay.
Entertain a motion to,
We were just verifying that we weren't conflicting with Martin Luther King holiday, but Mike has confirmed that that is not, the date that's been suggested is the week following the,
So this would actually be, well, there will be at least 2 new commissioners.
there will be.
I think I said that diplomatically.
Well, and I think that
Mayor Davis, I would just like to point out that I
At
think I
least.
got star bonds on my first day, so
Well,
I think these are
that
smart
would
people, they'll be able to
the
handle it.
First real meeting for the new commission. I would just throw it if you'd want to
did you say
give
that?
the new commissioners a couple
Didn't you
more
say
weeks.
January 20th?
The new-
22nd.
The new
22nd?
commissioners would be installed on the 8th. The following Monday, the 15th, would be the Martin Luther King holiday, and then the 22nd
So it
would be the
their
week
first
after
meeting.
that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, there's, as Commissioner Hodges would kind of said, we have a substantial package that we will have new information for. So I would suspect that anybody that is sitting in these chairs will adequately read their blue sheets. And if they have any questions, will be ably represented by staff and council that can help them along. So I feel confident, right, you know, I'd much rather have it be 120 days and have the applicant have time to get the time they need to put it together rather than go 90 days so that we can somehow fulfill the ability for this board that's sitting now to hear it. I think that our best shot at getting it right is making sure the applicant has adequate time and resources to put their end of it together, and trust that we're electing people that will.
I just didn't know whether you wanted it to be 127 days or
Oh, I
100.
see. You want a little bit more? Okay, you're
But
going for more.
Well, I mean, it can be a lot to handle the first meeting, but it's up to you.
January is a
I'm-
5-Monday month, so the 29th would be the 5th Monday, so
So it's
then
either
you'd
the
be looking at,
22nd or
you'd be
not,
looking at the
okay.
5th of February. Yeah.
Okay.
Boy, they're going to have an
Yeah,
easy
there's-
first month.
To be honest, Commissioners, there's no guarantee that if you move this one out, you wouldn't have another difficult topic on the
Right.
same meeting date.
True.
It just depends sometimes how they fall and what the timelines are.
Okay.
Okay, any more discussion?
So have we worded this to include the noticing provisions that Commissioner
Oh, I would,
Blanchard was-
Thanks.
I could make a
We
motion,
can-
and
whoever-
before, just as part of that discussion, I could make that
Right.
motion.
That'd be fine.
Just before I make a motion though, is there consensus that we feel that 120 days would be, is everybody comfortable with the
I'm
120?
comfortable with
Okay.
that.
Then I
They'll-
would-
They'll get through that fine.
Okay. Then, Madam Mayor, I would move that we continue this public hearing to a date specific, January 22nd, Monday, January 22nd, 2018, and direct staff to re-advertise the public hearing, or the public hearing notice, and to notice the school district and the county and any other entities that are that were noticed on this initial public hearing notice.
Second?
Okay, I have a motion and a second to continue this public hearing which is the
January 26th.
requesting a property tax exemption to January 22nd of 2018. I can't hardly believe that. 2018. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of September 11th, 2017. Item 6.2, authorize the purchase of 30 X-26P taser conductive energy weapons and ancillary equipment from Axon Enterprise Incorporated in the amount of $37,039.20. Item 6.3, award of contract for minor concrete rehabilitation, project number 70010D, to T&R Dirt Construction of Salina in the amount of $43,879.95 with a 10% construction contingency. Item 6.4, award of contract for the 2017 sidewalks, project number 70020, to T&R Dirt Construction of Salina in the amount of $62,810.75 with a 10% construction contingency of $6,281.08. 6.5, approve resolution number 17-7483, declaring the depot building located at 356 North Santa Fe a blighted building in the Salina downtown with respect to the Kansas Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Program. And item 6.6, authorize the storm sewer system repair at Neptune Avenue and Venus Avenue by Stevens Contractors Incorporated in the amount of $23,557.
Okay, is there any commissioner who wants to pull anything off the consent agenda?
I don't want to pull anything off. I just would like to make a comment on item 6.5, and that is to just show appreciation to the Beaverleys for taking on that depot project, the depot building. I think it's a neat project. I think a lot of people think it's a neat project. It's a nice continuation of what we're doing downtown. And I, for one, I think there's a lot of history there, and I think a lot of people are going to be really proud of what ends up happening there. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for that project.
And I agree. I went by that the other day when I saw it on the agenda. Check it out, and it's really badly in need of something. A lot of windows out. It looks like just really needs some work. But anyway,
And best wishes on your grant application.
yes.
Right.
Yes.
Keep our fingers crossed.
Okay, are there any other items that you want pulled? If not, I'll
Nope.
entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
Consent agenda.
Second?
Okay, have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, we're on number 7, administration.
Item 7.1, receive public comment regarding proposed use of the fiscal year 2017 Justice Assistance Grant Program funds and authorize the JAG program grant application and equipment acquisition as presented.
Okay, is there, let's see, what are we looking at here? Oh, yes, Mr. Forrester? Officer Forster? Paul Forster?
Chief Nelson.
That's what we have here.
So there were no comments, is that correct?
Apparently not. Let's get what you want to tell us here, and then we'll ask for comment. How's that?
These grants have been around since 2005. We've been involved with them for over 8 years now. It's a federal CJ criminal justice funding to state and local jurisdictions, which I'm sure you know. It's administered by the DOJ. It's intended to prevent and control crime and improve the CJ criminal justice system. I did learn it's not just for law enforcement. I knew that, but it's a lot more than just law enforcement that these grants assist. Prosecution, court programs, prevention, educational programs, corrections programs, drug treatment programs, crime victim and witness programs. We have purchased in the past years in-car video systems, body-worn video systems, silent alarm systems, in-car radars. We bought a whole bunch of different stuff, but each year when we become eligible, we look to see what our needs are. And this year, Detective Division Commander Paul Forrester, Captain Paul Forrester, he's one who made the list as far as what he felt we needed the most. I don't want to say the worst, the most. But what we had down there was quite antiquated, and some of that stuff we're replacing has been around for 15 years. So if you can imagine technology over the past 15 years, how much it changes. So that's why that rose to the top of our list. Yeah, that's why it's on the list. It's certainly my hope that this is approved, but obviously I'm here for any questions.
Okay. Any questions?
I was just impressed that all this stuff was done at our little local level there. It was,
Oh, yeah.
the description of the various tools.
Yeah, it's been done for a long time, but yes. But I can see where you'd see that, because I was too a little bit when I got here, but they have impressive technology downstairs, they really do. And it goes without saying, the majority, if not all, of that technology, we need a judge court order to do it. We just don't do it. If anybody had any concerns about that, it takes a court order has to sign off on it before we even utilize any of that equipment that you're reading about.
That question did cross my mind every time you see the word covert on something here, but I'm
actually
assuming someone gave signed off permission to do this.
The chief just signed off. Okay. Thank you. Any
Thank
questions?
you.
Okay.
No, that's,
Okay.
unless questions, any questions from the commissioners? Okay. Any public comment? No public comment? Okay. I will entertain a motion to, we just need to what?
Looks like
Authorize the JAG program grant.
I guess, yes, authorize the grant request.
I'll take a swing at it. Madam Mayor, I would move that we authorize you, the mayor, to sign the memorandum of understanding, the electronic submittal of the JAG grant program grant application as presented, and purchase 3 covert tracking units, 1 covert listening device, 2 video surveillance systems, and 1 GPS tracking unit as stated.
second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve requesting a grant for the Justice Assistance Program. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you very much, Chief. Item 7.2.
Item 7.2, Resolution Number 17-7481, formally adopting the amended City of Salina municipal naming guidelines.
Mr. Jason
All right.
Gage.
Mayor and Commissioners, thank you. Your original naming guidelines for facilities was approved by the governing body in 2007, and that came on the heels of a naming attempt and process that was used for a city facility. At that time, it was decided guidelines would be should make it a lot smoother, a lot easier. And just to kind of go through some of the highlights of what your policy has had, it's broad-based, creates a broad-based definition of municipal facility, because that's what you're there to name. It does exclude city streets. That's usually considered a different type of thing to name, so we don't include streets. They could have their own process. A requirement that no municipal facility can be named without first being considered a qualified municipal facility. There may be times where there are properties you say we really don't ever want those to be named, and it's easier to just not qualify them than it would be to wait, get a naming request, and then you think, oh, well, I'm not sure we really wanted this facility to be named, but then it creates some sore feelings, and that's why that's in there. It creates different naming categories. We have a traditional municipal designation, City of Salina, water park would be an example, or City of Salina soccer field or something. Another category is in honor of significant giving to the facility or the city, a philanthropic type naming. In honor of persons of local, regional, or national significance is a category. Or in honor of a local landmark, identifiable community characteristic or resource, the Smoky Hill type thing with the river. So those are kind of examples of that. It provides a formalized and standardized approach to the naming process. There is a naming petition required for honorary naming and landmark naming. The active use of directly related boards or committees. So if the function in which the facility is in has an advisory board, then there's a role for the advisory board to make a recommendation to you. A strong emphasis on public input, including a formal public hearing requirement and specific notice provisions, and strict requirements regarding the physical name application being limited to a sign and related plaque, so you don't go crazy with it. So those are the key components that you've had for all that time. More recently, when the Salina Fieldhouse project was in the design phase and we brought back the naming, that initiative to name was really not something that these guidelines really took into consideration. So as we went through there, it didn't take long for staff to realize we probably need to brush these up, get them updated in case that type of initiative would happen again. And so, and what that was an initiative to name the building and multiple areas of the building, but based on working with multiple donations from, at the time, you don't know who's actually going to give or how much. So it's a broad-based type request and donation effort. And so we really didn't contemplate that. We really more contemplated maybe naming after a single individual person or an entity or something like that. So what we did is I made some amendments. I made some, as I went through it, I felt that there were some areas where the verbiage could be a little bit clearer. So you're going to see a lot of just housekeeping amendments. I won't go through all of those, but that's what they are, just to make sure clarity is good. Amended process to address the philanthropic naming with the intent, when the intent is to solicit donations from broad-based donor base, which includes a pre-approval of a specific naming plan by you prior to this soliciting of donations. Now, the facility would already have to be qualified for naming, but if someone wants to do a broad-based naming initiative, they need to create the plan, bring it to you, get the plan blessed first, and then can go out and try to come up with the dollars and so forth. And then the policy talks about the components of what that plan would include, so you would fully understand what the intent is, the spaces to be named. You'd have the opportunity to deal with the amounts, the targeted amounts, and approve all those pieces so that you're comfortable with the plan when they go out and try to exercise and find the dollars behind the plan. There's the option of requiring a minimum giving amount for full facility naming to be equivalent to percentage of the facility's value. That came up in the discussion whether there should be a threshold if you're going to name the whole facility. That's a little bit tricky because if you have an expensive facility and you want to put that name on it, you can get up to a very, very high dollar amount pretty fast. So we left that blank. You could decide as we go through that you don't want to have that at all, or you could decide what percentage you might want to agree on for that. But I did want to give you the opportunity for that. And then clarification regarding the recommended board or related board when more than one board may have a fundamental relationship to the facility. There could be an occasion you could have multiple boards, so it clarifies how we deal with a single board so you don't have competing input coming in and out. We just thought that would be a good cleanup item. It's not really applicable too much to your strategic plan. There's no fiscal impact by this action. So what we have is three options. Approve the resolution which adopts the amended Salina Municipal Facility Naming Guidelines to provide any additional thoughts or desire or direction for staff to tweak it at your discretion or not to approve it at all. If not, we're still working under the original. So at this point, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. And we do anticipate there could be a tweak or two along the way, so you're not going to hurt any feelings by offering that up.
Okay, with that last statement being most important. For the philanthropic naming, is the public hearing still required?
Excuse me, yes, the public hearing, that has not changed.
So
There's still a
that's
public
required for
hearing
any
requirement.
naming?
Right, we didn't
type,
pull the public
okay.
hearing. Hold on a second, let me go back. You said that.
No, the naming
I'm not
petition
sure.
is not required, but the...
Yes, that's correct.
But the hearing is still required?
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
And as far as the full facility naming, if we were going to set a percentage threshold, would there, I'm assuming this is for a new building, Is there,
It wouldn't have to
Wouldn't
be. It wouldn't have to be. You could have an existing building that's been in place that maybe has a generic City of Salina whatever name, and there's a desired initiative to put a name on it, and again in the philanthropic section here, and then you would have. What we do in that case is we may have to estimate to some degree what the value is if you should do that, and then the naming initiative would have to hit. If you chose to put a % of the value, would have to hit that threshold in order for you to consider doing that. And again, that's totally up to you. That was an item that was discussed with the last naming, and so I thought, well, it'd be good to give you the option to talk about that.
just as a probably poor example, if someone wanted to have the library named after someone, it would be the current market value of the library would be the
Correct.
amount that
Yeah, that would
be
make up the
base.
100% piece. And if we just make up a value and say that that's $15 million, and then if this said that 10% is the threshold, then you're looking at a $1.5 million minimum donation in order to name the full facility. And that's how that would work. It's a baseline. And again, if you're not comfortable with that, they can easily be struck. But it was brought up, so I thought, well, it's worth your discussion.
And I guess we'll
I'm not
just,
necessarily recommending it. I'm just wanting to make sure you know that it's really yours to discuss. And you're going to see variations for naming all over the place across the country. I don't think there's a best practice that I'm aware of. Sometimes you will probably see a minimum percentage. It might not be in policy. It might be in conversation, actually. So this is if it's important enough that you'd like to see that, it gives you the opportunity to establish it. But you certainly don't have to. And like I said, it can be pulled from it pretty quickly as well.
I think it's a good idea. We'd have to have a discussion as to what percentage. Mine would have been a little higher than yours, the example you gave. But I guess whenever we get to that point, I'll.
Sorry,
For-
but my
for-
feeling is it ought to be struck because you never know what's going to come on the table, and you might not want to, you could your ceiling could be a floor and your floor could be a ceiling, so I'm not comfortable with it.
Yeah, what you have to really consider is what is the value of the facility, because that's going to establish your bigger number. And then as you look at the percentage, you have to think about what is the probability. If the desire is to try to, if you think there could be an opportunity to rename, the question is, do you price yourself out of the opportunity? So it's about balancing that if you're going to have this. And so those are really the things to keep in consideration.
Something that crossed my mind as I was reading this is if it could be tied maybe to the taxpayer contribution. And I realized that is something like your example, the library, obviously that was built decades ago, so that might not be, it might not be a very good idea. In theory, I do like the idea of setting a minimum percentage, and I was just trying to go back and think about the value of the field house, the value of the Tony's Pizza Event Center, and how that would have worked out to a certain percentage of that. And it's hard. I mean, I can see why I can see why you left that up to us, but yeah. But I mean, I was thinking 10% of taxpayer contribution is something that came to me off the top of my head. That was my first reaction.
I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm not going to wade into what percentage we ought to pay. I probably agree more with Commissioner Ryan on this thing, in that I think to not set a specific amount is kind of what we have in our existing policy. And I don't think that the problems that we had with the naming of the field house had anything to do with our policy. I think it had to do with people not following our policy. So whereas I like some of the housekeeping that went on with this, and I think it's good to do, I'd be slow to throw a whole lot out that I think probably just opens up bigger cans of worms and people trying to figure out percentages and so on, because I think at the end of the day, there's probably a clause in it that gives the city commission the opportunity to waive this policy should they want to waive the policy. So
That's correct.
I think if it gets too difficult in the trying to figure out what that is, I think it's all too easy to just get rid of the policy and just make it up on the fly. So I tend to want to stay away from some of those, that horse trading, if you will. Question I have, though, is to make a distinction between philanthropic naming versus just a naming for marketing purposes. Because I would see, and I'm going to bring up and ask you what category, I'm assuming Tony's Pizza Event Center falls into the philanthropic naming.
Yeah, I believe it
But
did.
philanthropic tends to suggest that it's a donation without any, it's more of a charitable type, hey, here, I expect nothing from this. And a lot of the naming, obviously, is market-driven. So unless it's an anonymous donation and we don't name it the anonymous field house, then I think it's kind of a gray area between philanthropic and a business arrangement. So I don't know if it makes it easier on a philanthropic area to start figuring out what limits might be and so on. And marketing might be a little bit easier on a business decision because you're probably talking like, and I might add, I like the arrangement that we have with Tony's Pizza Event Center. There's a term, it's ours is 15 years, a dollar amount, and there are other things that are part of that contract as well that provide mutual benefit for the parties. So I don't know if in revisiting this policy that if it makes any sense to have a category that's kind of more in line with what we've done with the event center to encourage that, and I think it comes into line. When do you price yourself out of something you really want? Because a lot of that is going towards general fund, towards our general fund, and really helping to offset some of the operation costs over the years on that, and the upkeep on the building. So that would have been a really tough one to come up with. Okay, what's the original? What is the value of the building? What is the value of the remodel? We remodeled part of it, and they want to name the whole thing. Heritage Hall was done years ago, wasn't part of the recent remodel. So I think that I'd like to stay away from some of the difficult things that I think comes down to just abandoning the policy. Do you have any thoughts on how we might be able to look at almost providing you with some guidelines when you go to negotiate?
Sure.
I'd rather see a negotiating policy versus that, because I think with our municipal naming policy, I think we had a good policy. We had a partner that didn't follow that policy, and so it made it really hard for us to have to fulfill promises that were made by somebody else in what was a good faith attempt to do fundraising for this project.
Well, and I agree. I mean, I see what you're saying. To their credit, though, we really didn't, in our policy, say, and I'm not saying that someone should or shouldn't have contemplated this, but we didn't have in our policy directive that said, hey, please get your plan approved first. But I did think that it did highlight that we do need to do that, because we could have that again. And as a matter of fact, as you know, we spoke of the Smoky Hill River Renewal Project, and that probably provides some opportunity for us to look at that. So I think we can complement that. Are you thinking that with the what we might call like some kind of a commercial naming category, a similar process to philanthropic, but just separate the categories?
Well, I think it would be easier at that point to do a cost-benefit analysis to figure out, okay, what might this be worth? Because you have something you can go to look at. What are advertising rates?
So possibly putting a value, a minimum or something on that one, not necessarily the philanthropic.
Right,
then.
yeah, the philanthropic, I think, is difficult because how are you going to put any value on a gift?
Yeah.
So, but I think it would be helpful to have guidelines that just make sure if you're going to do cost-benefit analysis, it's something that is actually measurable.
I'm glad that we're at least addressing this issue, because I remember through the years it's been pretty awkward on some of these
I'm
naming.
afraid I won't be able to take all the awkwardness out, but we're trying to
Oh, no,
get that
you
a
won't
little
be
as
able
we
to,
go.
but it's going to help, I think.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Mayor. I was just going to say, so we're talking about maybe adding another category, the philanthropic naming as it stands, except with the removal of a percentage of the facility value, and then adding like a negotiated purchase or a marketing naming that we
Yeah, we could call it a
can type.
commercial sponsorship
Yeah,
name
whatever
or
that
something
looks
like that.
like.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, that would
I
be
know-
easy to do.
Well, and I think it's probably going to be the category we're going to see the most action in.
Could
Because
be.
I know that Chris Cotton, Director of Parks and Rec, really is aggressively going out and trying to solicit sponsorships and so on. And so I think that that might be something, at the very least, that we have that policy in place so that if somebody says, hey, if I'd have known it was that cheap, I would have tried to get that,
Mhm.
and make it difficult on your governing body to say, well, they were first.
Right.
So if we could just have kind of something there that, and it might even encourage people to explore maybe participating in a program like that, if they know that it's, there's a process to it.
Is that something that there's consensus on then, to take on the changes we have with the philanthropic naming, but eliminate the percentage piece, the minimum contribution, to add that extra category that deals with the commercial sponsorship type naming, and then go ahead and have the percentage piece in that part?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that make sense for everyone?
Yes.
A commercial
Do we have-
naming category.
Yeah, of some kind, yeah.
To add to that, that's okay with me, too. I think
And
that's
I
fine.
hate to kind of muss up the works here, but because I do know that we did approve a related type policy for Parks and Rec. And so if we could just make those kind of merge.
Yeah, I don't know if we can merge those very easily, because that one hits a couple, it hits sort of a pure advertising, and it hits
Okay.
a sponsorship, and it really, for the most part, considered to be a shorter time frame. I can't say that you couldn't cross over time frames somewhat, but I had thought of that as we were speaking. We'll take a look at some of the language we have in there
Okay.
as well. Let me ask you this then, have you contemplated what your baseline percentage contribution, or how you'd like to value the minimum contribution towards a commercial sponsorship type naming?
I think the market would have to dictate. So again, somebody's got to have a good crystal ball.
I tell you what I think it ought to be linked to, I'd like to see it not linked to the facility cost, but the maintenance and upkeep. Because I think that's one of the things that, if somebody's going to sponsor something, I think we ought to tie it to, I think it ought to be tied to, those dollars ought to be tied to something that we can anticipate what it might cost. And so if we're not building something that maybe only costs $1 million, but it costs $500,000 a year to maintain or operate, if that makes sense. I mean, it's,
Would you envision a different plan for a new building being constructed as opposed to an old one already established?
Well, and that's something, too. It ought to be,
I'm
it seems to me
asking
like
this, but-
that's a good point, because
yeah, I'm not opposed to that, but my main concern is that if we have some policy for naming things, that we know what those funds are going to, and how they relate to any sort of, if we want to say we want to do naming rights to help maintain and operate a facility that's going, or one that, and that's our goal. It's like, okay, well, what percentage of that, what part of that would we like to see out of that giving versus what taxpayers are already putting into it?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to name something out of something, I think it goes back to Commissioner Hodges' thing. It's, if the taxpayers are paying 99% of it, you ought to factor that in somehow to how much you need that fund versus kind of what the market value of that naming might be.
Yeah, and I want to be careful that we don't confuse the basis for the minimum contribution with how the funds are going to be used. In essence, unless there's a stipulation in which, for how the funds would be used, in which you would get to judge that stipulation, we to the best we can, we try to avoid too much earmarking long-term, because we have to count for it every single year. So we try to do that, try to avoid that. And particularly if it's a general fund type facility, it's easier just to put it in the general fund, and then we know we're going to maintain. Now, if it's for a specific aspect to the facility, obviously you do that aspect. But if you're talking about ongoing maintenance, and you're almost creating a dual obligation in some ways too. What if for some reason you wanted to reduce the maintenance cost, right or wrong decision? Well, there's money that says that you're supposed to keep it fully maintained or what have you. You get yourself compromised a little bit pretty easy. And quite honestly, what happens is if you fast forward and it's a fairly long-term contribution, you might not even be tracking it. So that's a little bit tricky, but you do have the discretion. There's nothing in the policy that addresses how it's used other than if there's a stipulation, it needs to be made clear so you can decide if you agree with the stipulation. Absent that, it's just a pure budgeting kind of decision for you guys. You have the full flexibility there. So you do retain that full flexibility right now on the use of funds. But as we come back to a minimum, and it's almost sounding like you're not sure if you want a minimum even for the commercial sponsorship. You just want to kind of judge it when you get it and see and have that discretion. And if that would be fine. And basically what we would do is we could create the category, the additional category. It'd look a lot like the philanthropic in that case. And if you ever wanted to change it later, you could do that.
Right.
It's no big deal.
And the only thing that I could see on some of these is, and I would certainly leave it to your discretion and figure out what the implications might be, but just kind of getting back to that whole, say someone wants to have the naming rights for the library, and it comes out and it's an action that it's X dollar amount, someone coming in later, like, or during that process and say, hey, wait a second, I'd be willing to give you X amount more. How do we, just, if there's any way at all, if it's too complicated, don't go there. But you know what I mean? Almost to, and it almost might be in the designation process, if a building is designated for naming, it ought to say there's an open period that if someone makes a request that, hey, we want to name this, then at some point it has to say, okay, now it's open for other people to make a proposal or something.
Yeah, you can designate at any time. And for example, if you have a new facility that's being built and you designate it as eligible at that time, anytime from that point forward, unless you should choose to take it off the eligible list, you can have a naming proposal come in. So far, we haven't had the situation in which we have an active naming application and proposal, and then maybe there's a public hearing and the information's out, and someone else comes in and says, hey, I would give more. You're almost into a bidding. At that point, the dollar value, if we took them and said now we have a competition, the dollar value would kind of presumably be the deciding factor, when in fact you probably are going to have some other factors you're going to be looking at. And you could look at it and say, well, we're going to finish this application and this process before we would look at another. But if they offer it up to you, you're still going to know what it is. So it's not as if you're not going to know what it is either. So there's not probably a real easy way to deal with that. But I'd probably say it's best not to create a dueling situation where it feels like a bidding situation if there are factors other than just dollars that you'd want to consider. If the dollar amount is the only factor, then we could create a little reverse auction. Or I guess in this case, it'd be like a real auction, and they could go from there. We could get a little online thing going for you.
Just practically speaking, do we have a list of any municipal facilities that have been designated for naming for which no one has offered a name?
Yeah, that's a good question. I need to go back. I don't believe when this policy was first approved that all the facilities were in essence hereby designated. But I will go back and check to make sure of that. If not, the designation would just be related to any facilities that have been named since then. But I'll check to be sure.
Because I'm getting the impression that most of these come up only when someone expresses an interest in naming, and then we sort of ahead of time, so to speak, designate the building as eligible. Otherwise, none of the buildings are on that list unless they've already.
Yeah, I believe
named.
that's correct, but I will go back and check to make sure that we didn't have a list for designation, eligible properties that are designated for naming.
Right. And Martha, how many lift stations do we have?
And this may be foolish or a little facetious, but how about a waterway? Is that like a street, or is that and the facilities attached to it, would those be municipal facilities?
We could add it, this doesn't anticipate a waterway. Now, if we're talking about a Smoky Hill River renewal and there are structures associated with that, a landing area, boardwalk, something like that, those would fit in because of the structural aspect. Now, if we wanted to include a waterway, you want to rename the Smoky Hill River, I don't know. I don't even know if you can do that, but I suppose you could honorarily do it if you wanted to, but we could provide for that.
There's the Ben Vidrickson Highway.
Be 27 million for that one.
Most of our, we don't really have a lot of waterways. And again, those are already named in it from a different source, so those would be difficult. I'm trying to contemplate what that waterway might be. So-and-so drainage ditch, that might be as close as we have. But,
Detention
we
ponds.
would definitely take money to name those, I think. But right now, technically, a waterway is not included. If you'd like it, we could easily add it, if that's something you'd like to
Well,
do.
there would be, I mean, I think there's a little children's waterway that might be, I don't know what they're talking about really in that. I'm seeing something that may not be what they're planning to do, but
Yeah, let me look real quick at my
I know there was a
definition
children's
here.
area where there was water and stuff, so I don't know, maybe that's possible.
Right now, a municipal facility is any property, street, park, ball field, building, portion of a building, bridge, parking lot, plaza, or component contained therein that is either owned by the city or in which the city has retained naming rights. Plaza is close, but it wouldn't necessarily be a plaza. I think I could put some language that could basically make it any other physical structure that's owned, if you want to do that and give you the full flexibility. That makes sense?
Does the city own the river?
Not entirely. Not yet.
Or do we own any of it? I mean, in true.
Yeah, there's certain
We own the
areas in
water.
which we own underneath the river. There's certain areas
I don't even want
in
to go
which
there.
there is not municipal ownership of the river right now.
I think one last thing, I'm sorry, I'd like to say is that on the commercial naming, I just want to make sure that we've empowered staff to, to determine the value of a name and the value of a building, because it's in their best interest to negotiate the highest price for a naming right. And, I just want to make sure that we're giving them the discretion that they need to go ahead and pursue those negotiations. I don't want to tie their hands too much.
Yeah, and I feel the same way, but I feel fortunate that our first shot at it, and I think you deserve a lot of credit for it, it went smoothly.
Yeah.
Because it's probably something that could get a little rocky if not handled delicately. So I think we did real well the first shot at it, but it might be easier going forward to have something that allows you to have a little more comfort level with knowing the governing body has a policy in place.
So am
Sounds
I
good.
hearing we need to ask city manager to just maybe add some of those things to the resolution and
I have three
Bring it back
things.
to us, or-
Right now, I have add additional category, in essence, for a for-profit situation or commercial naming situation. At this point, without a minimum value, so to leave discretion to the governing body. Let's see. Add the definition of municipal facility to include, in essence, something like other physical structures, so that you have that full flexibility. And then I just had a note to check for prior eligible facility naming designations, just to see what we have. That's more of a sidebar task, but the two additions that I mentioned. Is there anything else in here that you feel like you'd like to take a look at and modify?
anything?
Well, we're going to strike the paragraph.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
eliminate the paragraph that deals with the minimum amount in the percentage. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, with that, then, if you'd like to maybe make a motion that I bring this back to you at a future meeting date. You don't have a public hearing, so I don't think we have to set the date specific. I think it'll be probably 1 or 2 meetings out. It won't take too long. And then that's what we'll do with the changes as requested. Give you a chance to take a look at the final language of those.
If the chair would allow, I'd just simply like to say so moved.
That works. I think
So
Shannon probably
moved
has
already.
that.
No date specific.
No, it'll be either
Well,
the next
okay.
meeting or the meeting after.
Good.
It won't take too long.
Good.
Is
Second.
there a second? Okay. There's a motion and a second to maybe reconstruct Resolution 1774-81 to include some additional items. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. We're going on to 7.3.
Item 7.3, authorize the mayor to enter into an agreement for a trailer-mounted portable engine generator for the wastewater collection.
Yes, you have talked to the mayor about this. She doesn't know what this is. Trailer-mounted, portable engine, something.
Thank you,
Tell
Mayor
us
and
about it.
Commissioners. I will try to explain that to where it makes sense for you, hopefully.
Okay.
Currently, wastewater collection staff operates and maintains 59 wastewater pump stations, and we have 4 engine-driven pumps of variable sizes that we use during power outages. And the proposed trailer-mounted engine generator, it's supplied with a switchable voltage output so that we can utilize it with 54 of our 59 wastewater pump stations. And just for a quiz for Commissioner Blanchard, Wichita has how many wastewater pump stations?
I'm going to go with about 20.
56.
What do we
And they're
have?
59. So we're still ahead of Wichita, and they cover a lot
And they're ahead
larger,
of us that way.
a lot
Okay.
larger area and more population than we do. I'm not going to say we have bigger stations, but we have more stations than they do. So we have a lot of infrastructure that we have to maintain there. So this generator that we're proposing to purchase offers many benefits to our department and to the city. One being it allows us to be able to bring on an additional pump station during power shortages. And the one that my staff will be most pleased with is with the portable pump or the engine-driven pump. They pull up, they have to drag out hose, drop it into the pump station wet well, connect it to the pump, take discharge hose, connect it either to a force main or a near manhole. So it's kind of a timely and heavy process to get that done. With this portable generator, they pull up, I'm going to say they plug it in, flip the switch to change from the regular power source to this generator, and we're off and running. So it's very quick and easy and allows us to get to more pump stations in a power outage. And the other that I think is a big benefit for the city as a whole is that we'll be able to use this at a variety of other facilities if we're ever in the need for some type of standby power. So offers a lot of benefits. So there's the good news. And the next news is maybe not so good, is that we received 5 bids. Our low bid was for roughly $36,000, and they just did not have any piece of their bid that met our specifications. The next bid was for $54,000. And it met the majority of our technical specifications, but we used all of our time up for the 60-day for the bid to be in good standing, trying to get sizing calculations from that company to determine that the unit would start and run all of the loads for our different stations. And for whatever reason, they could not and would not supply that to us, so we didn't feel that was a good option for us. Foley Power Solutions out of Wichita bid was $70,861.22, and they fully met all of our technical specifications and have a service center that can maintain and keep up the equipment. So that's where we're at this time, is with Foley Power Solutions. Just to give you a little background on the difference in budget of $50,000 to that number there. At the time we were developing our budget, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, requirements for off-highway diesel engines was Tier 4 interim. And they started with Tier 1 back in 1996, so they've been driving these emissions down over the last several years. And basically it pertains to nitrogen oxide and particulate matter. And now they have made it to their destination, which is Tier 4 final. And the end result is that has much stricter requirements, and where it takes us today is that we have a generator that meets the Tier 4 final, but has a higher price tag with it to meet those requirements. We discussed whether we could go out to bid and find a better cost, and we don't feel we could. The bids we got are what they are, and if we were Tier 4 final, that's what we'd be looking at. We did have the budget allocation of $50,000 for the purchase of this trailer-mounted engine generator. So basically, it's a generator on a trailer that we can hook onto a truck and pull to any location and plug it in and immediately start using it by flipping the switch. And the increase of the $20,861.22 is available from some savings on other sub-CIP items. If we include that in our estimates, and I provided you a breakdown of that, we'd have a total of roughly $10,000 savings remaining in our vehicle and equipment budget after we purchase this generator, if you would so agree. And we would have 6 of our 10 items completed on our vehicles and equipment. So we believe the budget's there to do this. And staff has identified the following options and recommendations for you. And we would pick option 1, which is authorize the mayor to enter into an agreement for a trailer-mounted engine generator with Foley Power Solutions of Wichita, Kansas, in the amount of $70,861.22, or we could reject all bids, and you could provide us with further direction. And I do have Mark Peterson, who's with our department. He has an electrical background, in fact, an electrical engineer, so he has scrutinized these bids much more so than I could or would. And so if you have any real technical questions, I'd be glad to ask him to help us out with any of the questions you might have.
Martha, real quick to supplement that, when most people think of a generator, they think of what you can get at the local home improvement store for about $400 or $500. Can you or Mark give us an idea of the scale of what this really is and what it could actually provide power to? I think that would be probably helpful.
I'm going to let Mark speak to that because he's going to talk horsepower and voltages that he has much more experience with.
Thank you. This would be a double axle trailer about 12 to 14 feet long, 6.5 feet wide, stand about 7 feet tall, 7.5 feet tall, and comes with all the components. You know, it's got an engine, it's got a fuel tank, it's got the emission systems, and then all that, the output of the engine then drives a generator that produces electricity. We have the ability to switch it to different voltages because not all of our lift stations are the same voltage. So we have that flavor to deal with as well. And then we come with a heavy power cable and a connector plug to hook up at the station. The stations that we're dealing with, the reason the sizing calculations are very important is because we have different methods of starting the motors. Some of them have VFDs, but some of them have soft starts, and some of them are basically just a big switch that turns the motor on. It's called across the line starting. And each of those put a different amount of load on the unit. And so you need to go through those calculations to ensure that those different station configurations would still start and run properly on the generator. So that's why the sizing calculations are very important. The across the line stations we have, the bigger ones are 15 horsepower motors, and there's 2 of those in the station plus all the other accessory equipment, lights, ventilation, controls, etc. Some of our other stations we have soft starters, and we go up to about 24 horsepower, and likewise the same unit can do those because they don't put quite as much of a load on that starting condition.
Okay,
So
thank you
that's
very
a lot
much.
of technical. Did that address what you were interested in?
Do all of these 54 stations, they already outfitted to have this big guy plugged into them? Is this like sticking the terminals on your battery with the battery starter, or do they have to be re-outfitted to have this thing hooked up to it?
We have a group of stations that already are configured. We have another group that's part of a CIP project for 2017 that we're going to add some connections on. and we have a rehabilitation project that's under construction right now, and those provisions were built into those stations as part of that project. So yes, we are addressing the other side of the coin as well.
Just have a question. Is this anticipated for a system where just one pump is going down, or, I mean, a scenario, or if there's a total community-wide blackout? I'm assuming you need more than one pump running to keep the system, I want to use the word afloat, but.
I will liken it to a condition where we had the floods in 2007, and we had lots of pump stations that were overloaded, and we had some power outages. With this, we can be at many, many locations with the power outage or high flows and be able to deal with the condition to help our problem. It's just multiple locations at one time, and I don't remember in '07, but we had up to, I think, about a dozen stations we had real difficulty with that had wastewater backed up, so it's...
Yeah, would this operate more than one station at a time?
No,
I didn't
not
think so.
I didn't understand your question. No, not at a time. It adds another pump station to our, or another tool to our toolbox, but it is so much quicker to move from station to station when we're in that out of power and backed up condition that we can move around. We use this, pumps, and we also use our Vector truck.
So
There's times when we use all the tools at one time.
So Martha, one example, because with each pump station, there's a tank
Yes.
that fills up so much, and then the pump, it triggers the pump to come on, then the pump pumps it out, and then, of course, the tank level goes down. So in essence, you do have the ability that if you had multiple stations, you pump a tank down, you've got basically a certain amount of time, if you could then take it to the next pump station, and so you could juggle a few.
And that is what we do with the engine-driven pumps, that just the time to move them and reconnect is, much greater, 3 or 4 times longer. And with this, it's very quick. We can go solve a problem at one station, unplug, move to the next station, and do the same. So we think it just, long-term, provides a lot of benefit from an extra tool in our toolbox. Plus, I think it will be used in other city facilities once we have it during construction or different projects. So I think the uses will become much greater than we might have thought initially.
And if you want to see your regulatory agencies, your environmental ones mad at you, dump some raw sewage all over a field or anywhere else near a lift station, and they'll not only be mad at you, but they'll charge you a lot of money for that as well. So there's a big benefit to this.
And I noticed the difference between this one and the only other bid that met the technical requirements. The other one had 2,000 more hours of warranty and an extra year. Is the value of that extra warranty less than the $14,000 difference?
It would not be 14, it would be less than
Yeah. Okay. And they also had some clarifications with their specifications, so they weren't 100% meeting our spec either. They had a unit they wanted to sell that met X and not necessarily everything we needed. But what do you think warranty would be, Mark, for an additional year? I didn't ask them.
We didn't quote that as a specific price. Just an off-the-cuff estimate would maybe be $600 to $700 a year.
So much less than the difference. Okay.
We didn't get a hard number, but we believed it'd be less than $1,000 a year, I think was our discussion. And that was not without calling them, but just based on other equipment that we buy additional warranty on.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just a real quick one on the, because we're looking at the $70,000 bid being, in essence, the lowest qualifying bid. But just to help me along with disqualifying the $53,000 bid, would I be correct in assuming that you had kind of gone through this enough to figure out that you don't have confidence in the sizes of those being correct, and that the nature of the request to the bidder was to say, show me where we're wrong here, and they just didn't get back with you on justifying that, hey, this is what it is.
That was a very protracted effort to get that information from them. And without having that information, that greatly affects our confidence that that particular unit that they bid on would provide suitable service for our lift stations.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's a bad unit. I just can't say that for our particular sizes and combinations of stations that we would have confidence that when we bring it up, it's going to run no problems.
Is there any way, that's roughly 14 or roughly $16,000 difference on that. Are we trying to get this into service in a particular time frame to where, like, give me an idea how long, I mean, I realize time is of the essence on these bids and it's not fair to the other bidders and so on. Was that the main issue, or are we trying to press this thing into service quickly?
We would exceed our 60-day limit, and we checked with the manufacturer, and by the end of this week, they would add a 3% increase to this cost. Was
on the $70,000.
On the $70,000 unit, and the other unit, basically, we have an email from them that says you can keep asking, but you're not going to get it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was going to say it's not a matter of, hey, we haven't been able to get to it. They're really not interested in providing that information.
We have made repeated attempts.
Okay.
And that's almost verbatim from their email. I don't think I left out too many words.
Well, you were kind in the blue sheet.
Yes.
We're very puzzled by their response.
Okay.
That is puzzling,
Yeah.
that. Okay, thank you very, unless there's any other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Martha. Was there any public comment? Okay.
Madam Mayor, I move we authorize the mayor to enter an agreement for a trailer-mounted portable engine generator for wastewater collection from Foley Power Solutions, as recommended by staff.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to enter into an agreement for a trailer-mounted engine generator, and thank you. The mayor is entering into this agreement. Now she knows what it is. Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you. Go on to item 7.4.
Item 7.4, resolution number 17-7482, modifying the 2017 comprehensive fee schedule for the City of Salina Municipal Solid Waste Landfill, waiving the residential fees for a single-day event Saturday, October 7th, 2017.
Okay, Mr. Kowak.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Commissioners. Bring before you a resolution to modify the 2017 comprehensive fee schedule that was approved last October. Due to public input as well as requests from commissioners, we wanted consideration for a free residential landfill day to coincide with the fall fix-up, which is scheduled for October 7th. We are interested in waiving the normal fees of $10 per pickup load or car load, a minimum load of 660 pounds, as well as the normal fee of $33.50 per ton for loads that exceed the 660 pounds. The last free landfill day we held was actually back in 2009. It was extremely popular and can be pretty hectic. It was extended to a 2-week time frame to try to reduce the waiting times and the amount of congestion. But we are just asking for a single-day event this year. The lost revenue in 2009 was $16,680. The previous year's lost revenues ranged from $13,000 up to $20,000, but there again, it's almost been 7-8 years ago. So we're projecting lost revenues for the single-day event to account for $20,000 to $25,000, and there will be minor overtime costs incurred to hold this event. We are actually, it's not included here, but we are actually intending, if it's approved, to extend normal business hours to 5 p.m. instead of 2 p.m. on that Saturday. The request is for normal residential debris and refuse, not to include special wastes, which there's a list included there of asbestos, automobiles, batteries, bricks, dirt, freon, hazardous wastes, storage tanks, tires, and a few others. This request to waive the landfill days is consistent with the city vision statement that the city of Salina will be attractive and well-maintained, both within the city and along the adjacent interstate highways. It will be evident that good housekeeping and high community standards are valued. Salina will be environmentally conscious, balancing the expectations of a growing community with a necessity to preserve nature's assets and the future quality of life. We've given you two options: to approve this request or to reject the request and give us further direction. But we stand for questions.
Okay. Any questions?
I was just curious, do people actually bring automobiles out there?
They've had sheds, boats. They've had just about anything you can think of. People have tried to take it out there, so.
Well, if they can get it.
If they can get it there.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there any other comment? Any public comment? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we authorize waiving residential land fees for common waste for the Fall Fix-Up Day, Saturday, October 7th, 2017, and extend landfill hours until 5 p.m. that day.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to consider adoption of resolution number 177482 to modify the 2017 comprehensive schedule for the City of Salina Municipal Solid Waste Landfill waiving residential fees for a single-day event, which would be Saturday, October 7th, 2017, and running until 5 o'clock p.m. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay.
Just have one question, which was influenced by the vote. But will there be, or are there plans to advertise this in the paper?
Absolutely. Once approved, we'll have press releases going out tomorrow, as well as notification to Friends of the River, Salina Downtown Inc., and North Topeka, or North Salina, Northtown Salina representatives that indicated a strong preference for this to be taking place.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Blanchard, for bringing this up.
Sure. I'll just
Good
add
idea.
to that, to the sort of supplement the advertising the city's going to be doing, is that North Salina Community Development Group is putting a group of volunteers to go hang door hangers in the neighborhoods of North Salina, and part of that neighborhood Fall Fix Up. They're collecting going around collecting old tires and other large debris items in the North Salina neighborhoods, I think north of Pacific. So it's all part of that October 7th date. And we appreciate Jim's help with
It's going to
on
be
the
a
committee
busy
there.
day because it's also going to be a Veterans Parade that day.
It's another busy day, for
The
sure.
Vice Chair and I'll be on that. Okay. 8.1.
Item 8.1, application number Z17-7, requesting a change in zoning district classification from A1 to R1 on a 31.63 acre tract of land located on the east side of Markley Road between Magnolia Hills Estates and East Crawford Recreation Area. 8.1A, first reading, ordinance number 17-10901.
Okay, Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. We have given you a written report, and attached to that report were as many maps and drawings as we thought could be helpful to help understand this particular area. The property that's in question today, staff refers to as the Haig Trust property. Oliver Haig owned a whole quarter section in this area at one time, and then in 1957, the City of Salina condemned a portion of this to allow a southward extension of the Salina Municipal Airport runway. And then after the airport was relocated, Mr. Haig deeded 34.4 acres to the City of Salina, and that property forms part of the East Crawford Recreation Area. And the former Hague Trust property has the Markley Road Water Tower, the Barkley Park Dog Park, and the Central High Baseball Practice Field are all located on part of the former Hague Trust property. In 1985, Markley Road was extended from the south end of the old airport runway to Magnolia Road. And in 1995, Mr. Hague sold 20 acres on the west side of Markley Road to John Helene, who developed Valley View Estates, and that's a 26-acre subdivision that's located along the west side of Markley Road. Back in 2000, the trustees of that trust requested annexation of 100 acres, the remaining 100 acres that Mr. Hague still had, into the city, and that was tied in with property to the south of it, referred to as the Norton Tract. And the reason for that was primarily to call the question on whether this area was going to be served by Westar or by DS&O Rural Electric Cooperative. And so the annexation requests were considered at that time, and as part of that request, DS&O Rural Electric Cooperative applied to the city for a franchise agreement, and the City Commission turned down DS&O's request, and so this property was later transferred to Westar's service territory. So at the present, Wheatland Development Company, which is Dan Daly, purchased the remaining Hague Trust property. They are requesting that this property be rezoned from agricultural to R1 single-family residential. And our boundary is the East Crawford Recreation Area on the north, Markley Road on the west, Magnolia Hills Estates on the south, and agricultural land on the east between the request area and Holmes Road. And if you look at the east boundary of the East Crawford Recreation Area, that just about matches up with the east boundary of the request area. And so the plan would be to extend 2 public streets off of Markley Road into a new subdivision, and a total of 78 building lots are proposed. Tonight, your role is to determine whether there's adequate infrastructure in place to support residential development of this property, and whether the requested R1 zoning would be compatible with the zoning and uses of nearby property. As we look at the attributes of this property and the site, the suitability of the site for development, one thing that we went over with the Planning Commission in detail, and we have 2 maps in your packet, but one thing that makes the east side of Markley Road attractive for development as compared to the west side of Markley Road is that present the City of Salina is unable to serve the west side of Markley Road with any sanitary sewer service. However, we are able to serve the east side, and so that is why you see development occurring on the east side without development occurring on the west side. And you have in your packet there's a drawing that shows a shaded area that Ms. Tasker has discussed for many years, and that shows the area on the west side of Markley that is currently without any sewer service. And then also in your drawing, in your packet, is a drawing that shows the path of the city's interceptor sewer line, and that interceptor sewer line comes up the east side of Markley Road and then goes to the east of Holmes Road and then up to the sewage treatment plant. And because of that interceptor sewer line, and because there's a 16-inch water line in Markley Road that comes up Magnolia from the Key Acres Tower, this property is very well situated with city utilities, and the comprehensive plan encourages development to locate in areas where utility service is already in place. So from that standpoint, the city has the capacity to serve this property with utilities. And the other thing, 2 items that are notable about this property are it has a great deal of slope and elevation change, and that's not typical in Salina, at least compared to the subdivisions in the flat portion of town. There's a 40-foot elevation drop on this property from northwest to southeast. And then the final physical characteristic of the property is there is a utility easement and a set of high voltage transmission lines that run across the southern edge of this property. This is the same set of transmission lines that goes through the Wildcat Circle area. So while it impacts development, it doesn't preclude development. So based on the physical characteristics of the property, its proximity to Markley Road, and its proximity to existing water and sewer lines, the applicant believes that this site is suitable for residential zoning and development. If we look at the character of the surrounding area, not all of the property is developed, but what is developed at an urban density with similar zoning to what is being requested here. And in that case, we have Magnolia Hills Estates and we have Valley View Estates, and so the zoning being requested here is compatible with those two subdivisions. The proposed density is 2.5 units per acre, and the applicant views this as a logical extension of the development pattern along the east side of Markley Road as shown in the future land use plan. So we have water supply from a 16-inch water line. Utilities director and fire marshal have found that would provide more than adequate volume and pressure to serve this subdivision. There are 2 points of connection proposed. There's the future ability, if Magnolia Hills Estates number 2 eventually develops, there would be a street connection as well as utility connections over here. So this subdivision would have a looped system for water and fire protection. The plan for sanitary sewer is to come down. There's an easement right here with an 8-inch sewer line that runs down to the interceptor, and the plan is to tie this subdivision into that existing line. And the applicant's engineer has determined that that existing line has adequate capacity to serve this entire subdivision. So as we look at the comprehensive plan shows this as part of a suburban residential area, and that the prevailing the substantial pattern is for low to moderate income or more low to moderate density housing in a pattern of 2 to 5 units per acre. And that's what we're seeing here. So staff believes that the R1 zoning and the density being proposed is consistent with that R1 designation. The Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on the zoning part of this, and they voted 6-0 to recommend approval of the request for R1 zoning subject to satisfactory platting of the property. And so this is coming to you with a recommendation for approval. Their findings are contained on page 7 of the report as well as in the draft ordinance that is before you. If you concur with their recommendation, the attached ordinance rezoning this property should be approved on first reading. The second reading would be held in abeyance for 2 things. One, there would be a need to execute a development agreement relating to Markley Road, and there would need to be a final plat of the property. And I would just like to briefly mention that the 2016 amendment to the subdivision regulations allows a developer to request that their subdivision plat be approved with their direct access perimeter street, in this case Markley Road, meeting a standard not less than the interim standard. But the only way that that can be done is for the developer to request that the matter be referred to the governing body to consider a development agreement. And so the applicant in this case is requesting approval of their companion plat with Markley in an interim street condition. And so if you approve the request for rezoning on first reading, second reading will not occur until and unless there is an executed development agreement and then eventually a final plat. So that agreement would address the timing and the nature of any future upgrades or improvements to Markley Road. So I think I've done my best to summarize the applicant's requests, the surrounding area, and I would stand for any questions you have. We do have the applicant and his representative here, both to answer questions, and they may wish to address the commission, and I know we have some interested neighbors here as well.
Mr. Andrew, could you go over the concern regarding Markley Road again, as far as what was proposed?
The base standard that was adopted as part of the subdivision regulations requires that all perimeter streets, in this case Markley Road, be upgraded to a city street standard. And a city street standard means you have curb and gutter on both sides, and you have 33 feet of pavement width, and you have sidewalks on both sides. We all agree that Markley does not meet that standard because it doesn't have curb and gutter and it doesn't have sidewalks. However, it does carry between 4,000 and 5,000 vehicles a day, so it is suitable to carry traffic. So the amendment that was adopted allows the developer, if they wish to take that approach, is they may request that their plat be approved, which Mr. Daly has, with the abutting perimeter street being left in its interim standard condition, subject to a development agreement that would be worked out with the City Commission that would specify the timing, the financial participation, the level of improvement that Markley would be improved to at some future time. Or, if there is no development agreement that can be reached, then it would be the abutting property owner's responsibility to upgrade that segment of Markley to the full city street standard. Mr. Daly is asking to be allowed to develop this property by leaving Markley in its present condition, and if that were agreed to, then the primary change would be the construction of a public sidewalk on the east side of Markley Road. And if Markley was found to meet the paving width and paving depth requirements to be an interim street, then the only element that it's missing is a sidewalk.
Okay.
But that is a discretionary item that would be part of a future development agreement. The question before you today is whether this property, based on its situation and access to utilities and what's around it, is suitable for residential zoning as compared to agricultural use.
Questions? I noticed that if at full build-out, the development was going to be anticipated to bring an additional 800 vehicles per day on Markley Road. Has there been any looking at where those roads actually empty out onto Markley Road and what the visibility is like from those points, since it is such a steeply pitched land?
One of the requirements that the engineer for Kyle Valley is working on to present to staff and would have to be in place before there was any final plat is that an engineer for Kyle Valley is out looking at those locations and calculating what the minimum site distance would be on a 45-mile-per-hour street. And if they have to be adjusted slightly to maximize the sight lines, then they will. But the initial openings have been looked at, but there's a condition that was placed by the Planning Commission that their engineer has to confirm that it provides adequate sight lines at 45-mile-per-hour speed limit.
Are these openings on the curve part of Markley?
They're on
Most
I know
of
the
that
property is,
section of
but-
Markley is a sweeping curve, so there is no real straight section of Markley abutting this property.
That was my concern, yeah, particularly at 45 miles an hour. And the reason I'd asked earlier about the upgrade of Markley's, even with Magnolia Hills, is, we've talked about connectivity with the rest of the city. be it sidewalks, bicycle lanes, or whatever. And until this street's upgraded, you still have an isolated community out there.
At the present time, the Public Works Department is working on a plan to construct a path that would most likely be asphalt screenings at this point that would run from Stone Post Lane to the north up to the East Crawford Recreation Area, so that there would be a roadside path to get from Magnolia Hills Estates up to Barclay Park and the East Crawford Recreation Area. If this subdivision ends up being approved and develops, the segment in front of this portion would be a paved sidewalk instead of a limestone screening trail.
And the trail would be further away from the roadway than the sidewalk would be?
No,
Or
it would be hopefully in the same location that a sidewalk would ultimately get built at.
I guess walking on a sidewalk on that curb isn't any more comforting an idea
Well,
than driving on it.
there is
Yeah.
a physical challenge where there's a
Right.
mound that comes out that comes fairly close to Markley, and there's going to have to be some work done to remove some of that to get the path. But the idea is not to have a sidewalk that is anywhere near the traveled way for Markley Road, but to have it back a distance. The good news about Markley is there's 100 feet of right-of-way, and it's a two-lane street, so there is quite a bit of green space area that's between the edge of the road and the right-of-way line. So
I'm going to ask Vice Chair Ryan to take over for me for just a minute. I need to make a fast phone call.
Would you like to recess for a short period?
Well, we can recess.
Yeah, if we do.
I'm fine with that, too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, why don't we do that so you can participate?
Okay.
in it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. We'll just recess for just a few minutes and be back by 5:45. How's that? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think they did, so that's good.
Plants and joints, they may make them honeycomb.
Okay, we're going to reconvene. It is 5:45.
Grow into it.
I want to thank the commission and staff for giving me a few minutes to make a phone call, and we all needed a break anyway. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Andrew, I believe you were still,
yeah, I was just standing for any questions that
Questions?
related to the zoning aspect of this. I did want to clarify that the Planning Commission did approve a preliminary plat of the Wheatland Valley addition, subject to 14 conditions and an additional condition that obviously no final plat would move forward until there was a development agreement executed relating to Markley Road.
But you did offer, though, the possibility it could move forward without the development agreement. There was a scenario in which that,
No.
if
it could-
no agreement was reached.
The only scenario by which a subdivision can be developed with frontage on a road that doesn't meet the full city standard is if that is agreed to through a development agreement with the city commission.
and that's not currently being requested. Well, I guess it is, actually.
And Mr. Daly can speak to that himself. Mr. Daly's request is that he not be required to upgrade Markley Road to a full city street standard as part of the development of this subdivision, but that he be allowed to enter into a development agreement that would address the financing, timing, level of improvement to what might happen to Markley Road in the future, as well as other parties that might help contribute to that cost.
And he would be responsible for that segment of Markley, only that segment abutting his property?
That would be determined through a development agreement.
Okay.
The proportions, the cost, the timing, all of those things is what the development agreement process is designed to address.
Right, but the development agreement would address all of Markley to Magnolia, or just the parts next?
It would
to
need
the-
to address all of Markley, fronting the property, as well as Markley to the next closest connecting street, which is Magnolia Road.
Okay.
Which is a large universe and has other property owners involved as well.
Right.
But at this point in time, the only thing separating Markley Road between it and it being considered an interim street pursuant to our subdivision regulations is that it lacks any public sidewalk. And so what was explained to the Planning Commission and what there is no scenario by which Mr. Daly could develop this property where he would not be required to construct a sidewalk along the entire frontage of the subdivision. Because that is what is needed to meet even an interim street standard. And so it was prior to all these amendments, but what the City Commission did with South Ohio Street abutting the Ryan addition is that you required the developer to record a covenant agreeing not to protest the formation of a future benefit district to upgrade Ohio Street to city street standards. So that would allow you to control the timing of that, and it would also obligate any lot owners within that subdivision to contribute towards the cost of upgrading South Ohio. That's what was done in that case, but that was prior to this concept of having the development agreement.
You just mentioned 14 conditions
Yes.
that the Planning Commission, are they listed in here?
No, they are not.
Okay.
But it's always difficult and challenging to separate the two, but under state law, the Planning Commission reviews and approves plats, and the City Commission controls the zoning.
Okay.
But the Planning Commission has only approved a preliminary plat, and it cannot move forward to a final plat until the issues related to the improvement level on Markley Road are determined.
I would like to, and I agree with I look at the 4 and I see that, it's a logical, I don't see any deviation in logic of the Planning Commission to go 6-0 on a rezone of this project. What I would like to talk and ask a few questions about, though, is in regard to Markley as a whole being designated as an impact street and the implications that come along with that. Because as I read the packet, I understand that it's probably, the concerns that I have are probably the concerns that the homeowners at Foxtail were probably concerned with the aesthetics and so on. When I drive by down Schilling Road past that Quail Meadows, all of that with the fences kind of right out there to kind of where our path is. All of that was done prior to the adoption of the comprehensive plan that had the impact street and the complete street components put on that. Is that would that be?
That is correct.
Okay, and then when we did Magnolia, while that subdivision, I can't remember the name of it.
We have Eastview Estates is on the south side.
It was there, but when we redid the Magnolia to the comprehensive plans
to the complete
standards
street
for complete
and
standards.
Close to an impact street, but
Right.
a complete street standard.
Which I think, to compare the two, once we had the impact street and the complete streets, I really think that aesthetically, the ones on Magnolia, as they back onto Eastview Estates, are really kind of more compatible with the neighborhood feel and not just fences backed up onto a street. Part of this is being that to bring the phrase to bring it up to street standards. Are we looking at this being not just a normal city street, but this being designated as an impact street? Would those requirements be in place as well to say this, that we're just not going to get rid of the impact street, but that the concerns about the aesthetics and everything else that go along with a complete street and an impact street will be part of that consideration?
One of the things where we are in uncharted territory is the only complete street project that we've really done is East Magnolia. If you look at the cost sharing on East Magnolia, the cost sharing was public funds, 100%, abutting property owners, 0.
Right.
And so one of the policy concerns that will have to be addressed is what is the level of developer or abutting property owner participation? Is it simply to get the property where the street is to a minimum city street standard, and does the public at large help fund the things that make it a complete street, or is that something that the developers need to be obligated to contribute to?
Mm-hmm.
So the features that you see on East Magnolia include the widened hike-bike path. That is not a requirement on a basic city street. It is sidewalks. So if you're into the complete street standard, one of the things that the development agreement will need to address is the level of improvement to Markley Road. And one of the policy questions is the level of improvement of Markley Road from interim to city street or interim to complete street.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, and I mean, I don't know to what extent that's a policy decision, but since we're in open session, we can pretty much discuss whatever we care to, if I'm not mistaken. But I think there are certain considerations that go along with having a new subdivision versus everybody's already there, and then we kind of make that change, because I don't know what the proper term would be, but it'd be almost like wouldn't be coming to a nuisance, I don't know, but it'd be if you want to develop the property, you know that the comprehensive plan has that impact street designation. I think once we as a governing body adopt that comprehensive plan, there's an expectation from all property owners in the community that is now an impact street. So I don't know to what extent it's already in the subdivision ordinances that we've put in there or excluded. If we've set a minimum standard of just to city street standards, or if we made any sort of designation that said it city street standard to the level of standard that is present in the comprehensive plan. Do you know if there's any?
Having worked with Mr. Bankston on the language on there, he used the term applicable public street standard, which was designed to leave it open to, we have basically defined 4 types of streets in the subdivision regulations. You have the impact street, which is the highest end that might have street furniture or ornamental lighting or things of that nature. The complete street, which may or may not have medians, which would have the hike-bike path in lieu of a sidewalk, and then you have the standard city street. So the language that Mr. Bankston put in there was that no subdivision shall be approved unless all direct access perimeter streets and connecting streets meet or exceed the applicable public street standard at the time of application, or will be improved to the applicable public street standard as part of the development of the subdivision. And part of the development agreement and part of those elements will be the city commission determining what they believe the applicable city standard should be.
Would an impact street be considered, or could it be considered an applicable standard? I mean, is an impact street a standard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and Commissioner, as you know, it's called out in the comprehensive plan, and it's shown, I believe, if I'm reading the map right, that Markley is shown as an impact street on the map.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, that's what I was going
so you would
off
work
of.
from there down potentially through development agreement
Right.
on the interim standard.
Okay. Because I have to tell you that I noticed on that map that Holmes isn't an impact street, that Markley is at the end, and I can only make assumptions that one of the reasons that probably that was decided that that would be a good candidate for an impact street is that we have significant public properties, being the park, the ball fields, and the golf course on those, on that street, and so that the sort of an entry corridor, or it's even an entry corridor somewhat into the community, off of that onto Magnolia, and I think we've done a really good job on Magnolia to make that impact street a nice entry corridor as well. So that's just that's kind of my concern. I think it matches with everything else. I think probably if we can come up with some sort of mitigating technique to say the people that are across the street in that Valley View subdivision aren't just looking across the street into a cedar fence and then a brown fence and then a different chain link fence, or whatever. If there's some sort of aesthetic treatment that not only benefits what they look at, but that provides some sort of buffer so that we can implement that complete streets and that impact street program the way I think it was intended to be.
Just for the information, and I'll use the term negotiation or discussion, and it's fair to say that maybe the same concern or level wasn't provided to Schilling, but in the case of Eastview Estates, those trees that are there were placed there as part of a condition of plat approval and arrangement worked out between the Planning Commission and Mr. Byquist, who developed that subdivision. And so as a condition of approval of that plat, that buffer strip of trees between the property line or fence line and Magnolia Road were done as part of the subdivision development. And as they have grown and matured, that has provided a very great contrast between that streetscape and what you see on Schilling Road as you go west of Ohio. So we try really hard to try to keep the plat aspect from the zonings and keep those separate, but for Ms. Hodges' benefit, I will identify the conditions that were placed by the Planning Commission, and the first one was that the developer is responsible for all public improvements shown on the preliminary plat and preliminary infrastructure plan drawings, including any improvements to Markley Road determined to be required by the City Commission in a development agreement. So we are very clear that while the Planning Commission approves and disapproves plats, only the City Commission has the discretion to decide what the applicable standard should be for Markley Road, and that is addressed through a development agreement. The second condition was that a final phasing plan for public improvements shall be submitted with the final plat. Lot grading and drainage plan for each development phase shall be submitted to and reviewed and approved by the city engineer. All utilities shall be placed underground. Sidewalks shall be installed on both sides of all internal public streets and along the Markley Road frontage. A landscape berm or buffer strip must be provided between Markley Road and the fence line of the 11 lots backing up to Markley Road. City engineer shall approve preliminary plans and specifications for internal streets, water, sanitary, sewer lines, and storm collection systems, as well as the preliminary designs for the proposed detention pond prior to Planning Commission consideration of the final plat. Needed utility and drainage easements shall be provided on the final plat. The applicant shall obtain a letter from the city engineer approving the final storm drainage design plan and runoff calculations prior to consideration of the final plat. No outbuildings, fences, or large shade trees may be placed within the transmission line easement located at the southern tier of lots without written consent from Westar. Markley Road has been determined to be a direct access perimeter street and connecting street by the Planning Commission under Section 3674 of the subdivision regulations. The developers are responsible for improving 4,370 lineal feet of Markley Road from the northern edge of the subdivision to Magnolia Road to applicable public street standards unless the City Commission approves an alternate standard and financing plan as part of a development agreement. Restricted access shall be provided on Markley Road except for the proposed street openings. The applicant's engineer shall perform the engineering analysis necessary to determine whether Markley Road meets the city's interim street criteria and shall confirm that adequate sight lines exist for the two proposed street intersection locations prior to consideration of the final plat. The design engineer shall submit a report confirming that the two street intersection locations provide adequate sight distances north and south on Markley Road, assuming travel speeds of 45 miles an hour on Markley Road. So those were the conditions that were imposed by the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Andrew?
I said, so our focus today is to determine whether R1 zoning is suitable for this property. And I'll let Mr. Daly and his representatives come to the podium so they can address any questions you have.
Thank you, Mayor Crawford, Commissioners. My name is Dan Daly. I've been a residential building contractor in Salina for 36 years, and I've kind of watched this property over the last 8 to 10 years and always felt that it would be an excellent place for a residential development in our city. And I've worked with Caw Valley Engineering Department, or engineering company here in Salina over the last year to develop a plat and a plan for the residential development that I propose. And if you had any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them for you.
Any questions of Mr. Daly?
Just quickly on the questions and some of the feedback. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of the 17 homeowners that have signed the petition.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any thoughts as to that? I mean, is that something that their concerns are something that you can kind of agree with and feel like you want to help work to mitigate their concerns?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That came up at the Planning Commission. That was the first time I knew of anything like that. And my comment at the time was I appreciate the input that we got from the neighbors on Foxtail, and that I understand their concerns, and I'm the same way. When I walk out my front door, I want to see something that's attractive. And that was one of the conditions that was put on the preliminary plat approval, that we do something along there to provide a buffer, so that when they do look out their front doors, they see something different than what we see on Schilling Road today. We are working on that, along with the sidewalk design and location that would be required for to bring it Markley Road up to the interim street standard that's necessary for development in that area. And I think what may happen is something like we see on Magnolia, where we have a consistent fence line and a tree line that's not just a bunch of hodgepodge, different style of fences, different colors, and this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with what we were talking about earlier about the impact streets? And I mean, you or Caw Valley, do you guys have any? Does that give you any heartburn? Do you feel like it shouldn't be a impact street, anything like that, or?
I'm not aware. I haven't been aware that it would be an impact street or a standard street, or how Markley would ultimately be improved. Although I agree and understand that at some point in time, a street with that kind of volume and that sort of density around it has to be brought up to city standards. And I'm fully in agreement that Wheatland Valley subdivision would participate in that as long as it's at a fair level and that we're not expected to do the whole thing or something like that.
Right, yeah, it wouldn't be fair to make you do more than your share, so.
Right, our frontage is 1,270 feet, which is somewhere around 15% of what's there if you look at it on each side, and I know that that's got to be part of what we're doing, because that's the way the city is growing these days, so that we have something that looks nice and not, you know, what we have in other areas. So.
Right, and I do think that probably benefits your development.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Immensely, so, okay.
And I think the buffer zone also would be a plus for the development too, so, yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your.
Any other
being here.
questions of Mr.
Yes,
Bailey?
well, I guess I still have concerns about the feasibility of cars turning either into or out of that, or out of your development
Yes,
on a
sir.
road. It's basically a highway. I mean, it's in the city streets, but it functions like a highway without some serious traffic accidents occurring.
Okay, we have Justin from Caw Valley with us. I was just visiting with him about that, and they have done some engineering studies on that to determine what the necessary sight lines are for a 45-mile-an-hour street, and it's my understanding that we meet the criteria necessary for safe travel along there with the sight lines that exist. He could probably speak better to the specifics of that if you'd like.
I'd like to hear it, if I could.
Let's
yeah,
see if you
thank
can come up and visit with us a little bit. You can just give your name and address, please.
Justin Owens, 2928 Jack Circle in Salina. We have done the calculations, and the standard that we follow is the AASHTO Green Book, which is a national standard for highway design. And using those calculations and also looking at the survey that we've taken, we find that the sight distance needed for someone to make a left or right turn onto Markley Road from the addition, we have adequate sight distance to make that happen. So we meet 45 miles an hour.
When you're designing, I'm looking at the layout, the location, everything. Is there any assumption there that a lot of those turning movements are going to be right out motions and then down to Crawford, or?
Well, we just look at the worst case scenario, and usually your worst case is your left out of there. It takes the longest, and you have to look both ways. So you've got to be able to provide the time for them to make a decision whether they're going to take a gap or not. So we just look, I guess, at the worst case, which would be a left. So we haven't really looked at which direction would be the most predominant.
Okay, so you don't. What are the trip generations out there now? Are they predominantly going down towards Crawford or out towards any way to determine what those might be?
We haven't really looked at those at this point. No,
Okay.
yeah, I can't speak on that.
Because I'm thinking about going to a grocery store, and I'm not quite sure if I'm going to the one over on 9th and Magnolia or if I'm going to go around and go to the one on Cloud. But I can't go straight across.
No, nowhere there.
Okay, if there are no other.
And is this also taken to someone coming south on Markley, wanting to make a left turn into the development,
Right.
having to wait for oncoming traffic that's
Yes.
going, and there's time to make the turn, and
Yes, they
people
got-
coming behind that car to see that it stopped?
Yes, there's two different
Because
types
there's no
of
shoulder there. I mean, it's you either stop or you go off the
Yeah,
road.
Commissioners, there are engineering standards that they have to use when they're looking at that. So they'll look at all the traffic scenarios that would be applicable in that situation. I want to be careful that the questions you're asking are all very good questions, but they are related to plating aspects, not to
Right.
zoning.
Well, that's-
So even if you didn't get the answers that you would like to get, although they're doing a great job, even if you didn't get those, you'd have to be careful to separate those from your zoning decision. So just to let you know
Right.
that.
I just want to make sure that we don't do anything today that puts us past the point of being able to address this.
Well, again, as I stated, though, what you're talking about are going to be design aspects that relate to the plating. You have to be exceptionally careful not to take those and allow those to enter into a zoning decision, because your basises for those two decisions are totally and completely different. So I get the need, and like I said, they're very good questions, and all questions that will have to be addressed in the plating without question. But at this stage, your biggest issue is really, is the zoning compatible with the comprehensive plan, and that's really it. And then it's after that, if the zoning's approved, then you're into the plating stage, and then at that point, every one of those questions becomes very applicable in the response.
So it doesn't, but those questions don't go toward the, towards whether or not the road is of adequate standard now to affect any of the zoning?
Well,
or?
what you're asking, you have bits and pieces of questions that are leading to a full and complete traffic study, which is, I don't believe, a requirement in this scenario, although I need to defer to Mr. Andrew, because each of those questions are pieces of a traffic study. And if there's, from the perspective of turn movements and volume, I need to defer to Dean to address the specific planning aspects to see when that might be triggered. I presume that would, if triggered, that's by the Planning Commission. I'm not sure of that, but anyway, that's a question more for Dean. I just want to be careful that we don't dive into that we stay within the zoning.
Right.
Like I said, very good questions, all that will have to be answered.
I appreciate the distinction. I just want to make sure that we weren't doing anything that would tie our hands in the future.
Well, given that your factors are different for each of those two decisions, I don't believe you are, because again, they have the ability to address that in the plating, and so. And that's that'd be the Planning Commission with the preliminary plat that would be looking at those. So I'd see, Dean, do you have anything else you might want to add on with regard to those specific type factors in the process?
We have not, in my time here, ever required a traffic study for a residential subdivision. What we have done is we have required developers to do what Mr. Owens did. The locations for Stone Post and Brookfield on Markley Road and Magnolia Hills Estates, those are not there because that's where the developers wanted the streets. Those are there because that's where the engineers said that the openings had the best sight lines on Markley Road, so they had to design around that. On Magnolia Road, the driveways serving First Covenant Church are not where the church wanted them. The driveways are where the engineers said they had the best sight lines on Magnolia Road. So every decision about where street intersections are located on streets that have elevation or curves are based on the engineering criteria, not on the desires of the developer.
Thank you.
Just real quick, will there be that intermediate step then where prior to the Planning Commission getting toward answers to those questions that would be traffic study related, we apparently need to come up with a development agreement somewhere in that process. It always sounded to me like that it was prior to that action being taken by the Planning Commission, so they would know we're moving forward or not moving forward. How do we get that information and make that in a way that is fair, publicly, that's fair to the applicant, fair to anybody that in the public that has concerns about it, and so on? If it's not, I mean, it's a new step that we have in that development agreement, but at what point does that come in? Does that come in, you know what I'm saying?
You're talking about the development agreement piece?
Yeah, because I mean, right now we're saying we're willing to approve the rezone, knowing that that it doesn't meet the interim street, but that there will be an agreement, a development agreement,
right,
forthcoming prior to the Planning Commission looking at the plat considerations.
Right.
So so we make that decision, and then so I think it kind of might just be a little confusing as to when that.
Yeah. And
how we go about making that determination that everybody kind of knows where everybody is.
What I've told the developers and the way that it was structured this way, that is if this afternoon or now this evening, the City Commission should decide that this property should remain zoned agricultural and is not suitable for single-family residential zoning, there would be no plat, there would be no development agreement, there would be nothing. If you, after hearing the information presented, concur with the recommendation of the Planning Commission to grant zoning on first reading, the second reading is subject to platting, and platting is subject to having an acceptable development agreement. So if there's no development agreement reached, there will never be a final plat, and there will never be second reading on the rezoning. It will revert back to its agricultural zoning. But it is, in terms of the decision-making points and your roles, you first have to make a determination that residential zoning is a suitable classification for this property, so that you're not making decisions related to a development agreement before a decision has been made on the land use.
Yeah, so the Planning Commission has addressed the preliminary plat, isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so of course, we're addressing the first reading of the zoning. In order for the developer to be approved on the final plat, they will have, because they do not meet your street standards, Markley does not meet your street standards, which would be at an impact level street. So if the developer said, I will invest to take Markley at an impact level street in accordance with the infrastructure code that was adopted not too long ago, that's really easy. But quite honestly, you're not going to get that very often, because it's a huge expense, and you're also talking about at some point a connectivity here to Magnolia, which is also an expense that, quite honestly, the one subdivision shouldn't have to take all on their own. But yet there's an expectation there for the whole road. So then the way that the system works is that the development agreement allows you to contemplate whether you would allow an interim level street, which is the two-lane sidewalk, what we talked about earlier. And you could say no, and you may or may not have agreement on the development agreement, which means it's not going to go any further anyway unless the developer can fully fund the street requirement. But whatever is agreed upon in there, maybe it's an interim level street. Developer says, yeah, it's drawn up and it's all signed. That's one piece of all the rest of the aspects of this that then go back, that the Planning Commission has to deal with for the final plat approval, and we have to deal with on the final zoning approval as well. So you definitely get the opportunity to deal with it, and quite honestly, the development agreement is probably the key part of the whole thing.
And I agree, and so I just kind of want to lay it out there, because the part that's a little bit difficult is the fact that that we're voting to say, I'm going to vote in favor of something based on a future decision. Because if I said I only want to vote for a rezone if it includes an impact street where the developer is only responsible for his portion, it's not currently built to a certain standard, it needs to be built to a certain standard, and that is the conditions individually of my vote. And then it passes, and then down the road it gets watered down, and 3 votes end up taking the day on the development agreement, and it's contrary to what my vote considerations were for a rezone.
Yeah.
And so it almost is like, at what point do I not feel disenfranchised from my rezone vote?
Yeah. Dean, what section of the code was the minimum infrastructure requirement placed in?
It's in the subdivision regulations,
That's what I
section
thought.
3674.
So it's actually in the subdivision side of it. It's not in the zoning side of it.
Yeah, that's,
Is there any way to include any kind of reaffirmation that this is an impact street or a complete street? at some
Your
point?
comprehensive plan, which, again,
Right.
that is directly what you're
Right,
talking
right.
about, does, unless I'm misreading the map, I'll ask Dean to correct me, but I believe it looked pretty clear that Markley is a designated impact street, and that would be
That
the...
is correct.
Yeah, that's the
And just to be
determining
clear,
factor.
I mean, I think we had the applicant basically saying, yeah, everybody's in agreement with that, but I just kind of, once you make the zoning change, it's the zoning change, and the property can change hands, and...
But
Yeah.
you're not making a zoning change at today's meeting. You're
Right.
basically giving a preliminary concurrence to the Planning Commission's recommendation, and a whole lot of things have to happen before any zoning change becomes final.
Yeah, one suggestion I would make too is if you'd feel comfortable what we're talking about are some legal aspects, both that deal with your code and state law as well. If you still have questions about the difference in what you can go into from a plating versus zoning perspective, one option you might have is if you wanted to go into a brief executive session, I think we could, between Dean and Greg, could probably help you answer some of those questions as well. It's up to you.
I don't have any concern with, I mean, to me, what we're doing here is just, I mean, the applicant had asked for a change in zoning classification from ag to single-family residential. I don't have any problem with doing that. I think we can get further into all the details at a later date under a development agreement. Or
I would agree with all of that.
One-
You know, I have confidence in the development agreement or development conference side of it that they'll sort out those differences.
One place
Take
I'll
this first
direct you
step.
to is you have a draft ordinance that is attached. It's ordinance 17-10901. And in the findings that were based on the Planning Commission's findings, finding number 2 says that the location and physical attributes of this property, the availability of public utilities, and its frontage on an approved collector street make it suitable for urban density residential development, provided that adequate legal and financial assurances are in place to assure that Markley Road is improved to city street standards abutting this property in the future. If you want to modify that finding in some way to say, provided to ensure that Markley Road is improved to the applicable public street standard, or you want to include that to say that your finding is based on to ensure that Markley Road is improved to an impact street standard, or whatever a majority of commissioners feel comfortable with, that would probably be the place to address it, because that is a finding on which you are basing your decision. And if you're basing your decision on Markley Road being something above a basic city street standard, then that should be, that's why the word provided is in there, to give you a place to say what, because one cannot say that Markley meets the city public street standard today. So the finding is that you can only make that determination provided that adequate legal and financial assurances are in place to ensure that Markley Road is improved. And if you want something in there that's above the city street standard, then that would be the place to insert that.
I appreciate that, because I know individually, I want to make sure that whatever language is in there, and I certainly am fine with impact street standard, but if it's better, if staff feels it's better to put in there applicable street standard, then I would certainly be willing to go in that direction as well.
Yeah, I think the reason applicable was in the infrastructure side is because we knew we were working from multiple tiers of streets, from the impact to the, well, what's the next one down, the complete street, and then the full city standard, and then the interim street is the lowest default that you could go to. So that way it left it open, because in this case, it's very clear that the impact street is the one that you're working from because of the comprehensive plan designation that you have there.
Okay.
So you're good. I think you're very solid with that.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? Public comment? Just give your name and your address if you have comment to make. Feel free to do so.
I'm Eric Rasmussen. I live on Foxtail Drive, and any thing that I wanted to relate today was pretty well answered in the exchange between Mr. Blanchard and Mr. Andrews in regard to the buffer zone, so that there would be, and I appreciated Mr. Andrews referencing what you see on Schilling. If you can, in your mind's eye, see what you see as you look north as you drive down Schilling, and then compare that or contrast that to what you see on Magnolia across from Eagle Crest, basically. The trees there make one heck of a, for the most part, pretty nice buffer. And you do see a lot of backyard fences in all different varieties and sizes and shapes, and most of them in need of some repair. So that was the concern that I had coming here. I and some of my neighbors were here at the Planning Commission the first week of September, and obviously any concern I have has already been addressed, and anything that can be done is that's premature at this point, because as I understand it, it's the Planning Commission that has to approve the final plat. And part of, I think, what can be in that agreement or plat is something in regard to this buffer. Is that correct?
That's how we all understand it, I believe.
That's how I
Yeah.
understand it.
Well,
And we get all the minutes of those meetings,
Well,
so.
if you're as hungry as I am, I think that's enough.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Bring it back to the commission for action.
Madam Mayor, I would move that we approve on first reading ordinance number 17-10901, application number Z17-7, requesting a change in zoning district classification from A1 agricultural to R1 single-family residential on a 31.63-acre tract of land located on the east side of Markley Road between Magnolia Hills Estates and East Crawford Recreation Area.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 17-10901, application Z17-7. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, same sign.
Madam Mayor, can I just say, lacking discussion, I appreciate the residents coming out here, and I appreciate you signing the petition, and I just want you all to know that we got our blue sheet, and the first thing after the staff report was your petition. So if anybody out there thinks that staff somehow doesn't put, and commissioners don't put public concerns high enough on the chart of priorities, I think staff really, I appreciate that, Dean, that you put that in such a prominent position on that staff report, because it really is, I think, the culture of this commission. So I appreciate that. And then also, I got to thank you, Mr. Daly, for really working with these neighbors. A lot of times it's like, hey, I'm just going to go do what I want to do and forget about the public. And I want to thank you for really taking the approach of wanting to be a good neighbor right off the bat.
I think you're right, and I wish everybody in the world would feel that way.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. And yes, we do get all of the material. That's why we get it on Thursday, and we have 4 or 5 days to study it. Okay, item 8.2.
This is a thinner packet than your last one, but this deals with a replat out in the South Salina Industrial Park subdivision. And you are looking at accepting restricted access and easement dedications. There is a agreement that is not widely known between the City of Salina and Saline County that deals with the review and approval of plats of subdivision located within 1 mile of the city limits. And if you have property that is outside but within 1 mile of the city limits and you are platting that property, that plat has to be approved by both the City of Salina and Saline County for it to move forward. So this is the city approval side of this request. But way back in 1987, there was a request to rezone the property south of Phillips Lighting from agricultural to heavy industrial. That was approved by the Saline County Commission, and then a plat came forward, and it was reviewed by both the city and county planning commissions. And then there was an extension granted in 1991. There was a final plat of the property approved for 153-acre site. It was all one lot and block, and that was approved by the Saline County Planning Commission as well. But since that time, no development has occurred at all. And at this time, Westar Energy has a contract to purchase the north 48 acres of that subdivision to allow construction of a major electrical substation on the site. under the original conditions of approval, if any portion of this property is sold off, the property must be replatted. So that is why this before you today. And so the replat has a Lot 1 that contains 48 acres for a West Star substation, and a proposed Lot 2, which retains 105 acres south of that for future industrial development. When this was first proposed, it was within 3 miles of the city limits, but due to annexation, it's now within 1 mile of the city limits, and it requires both city and county approval. As far as the street access, there's one curb cut proposed on the north parcel, one for the south parcel, with no access proposed for Farley Road because the property, that road at this time is not adequate to support any kind of industrial traffic. The substation itself does not need a water supply, but any future development to the south would need to be served by a public water supply. There's a water main that ends at the Sleep Inn property there, and that would have to be extended. I know Ms. Tasker has some plans squirreled away that show conceptual extensions of water lines for this area. There's a public sanitary sewer line up at Sleep Inn and also up at Phillips Lighting and Crestwood, but there would need to be extensions of lines for industrial development, but not for West Star. We did want to note that on page 3 of my report, the word has should have been had. The staff did have a concern about the location of the pond proposed, but that has since been rectified by the engineers for West Star, and they have addressed city engineering's other concerns, which is why this is being brought forward at this time. But the plan is for a detention basin to be located in a drainage easement that's the north 170 feet of this property. And so they will size a pond that will deal with the runoff from the substation site. And there will not be any further development of this site without, for industrial development, without some major utility extensions. But West Star substation, their only infrastructure requirement would be to deal with their site runoff, which they will do by constructing a pond in the northwest corner of the site. Both the City Planning Commission and County Planning Commission have reviewed and approved this plat. Your role today is to look at the dedications, which is a 170-foot wide drainage easement on the north. There's a 145-foot West Star easement along the east. There's restricted access shown along the 9th Street frontage. And then Farley Road has restricted access due to the condition of the road. So if you were in agreement, the action today would be for the City Commission to approve a motion accepting the offered restricted access, utility, and drainage easement dedications, and authorizing the mayor to sign the plat, or the replat in this case. We do have representatives of West Star here if you have questions about the substation. It is, the reason for the 48 acres is that this is a pretty major undertaking for them in terms of the size of the substation and its ability to expand in the future, and obviously Phillips Lighting is one of their major customers. So with that, I'll address any technical aspects of the plat with any questions you have, but if you have questions about substation, those are best addressed to our West Star representatives. And
Okay, questions? Questions?
You are squirrel-proof out there?
We do have special equipment now. This substation, I'll just give a little background of it. So the current substation, you can't see it on this plat, but it's just south of N.A. Phillips, and it's kind of a postage stamp substation is what we refer to it as. And the current configuration just doesn't allow us to expand. It doesn't allow us to do what we need to. It doesn't allow us to do the switching that's required for town. So we proposed the new substation. We chose this location because of it's near the lines, the willingness of the landowner to sell, and just simply the size of the tract. So to address your question, we do have special, I don't remember what they're called, green cover, I believe, and there's special critter control.
Okay, can we get some of those?
Yeah. Any
Now,
other questions?
The existing one that you're going, are you replacing?
Yes, so we would be
existing?
replacing the NA Phillip, so that would eventually go away. And that is, do you have your pointer? Thank you. That is this
That's that
substation
one
right
going
there.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay, that makes sense.
Much smaller than what we need.
Okay.
Any other
Okay.
questions?
Any questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good luck with getting that out of your eye, whatever it is.
She had to wait too long. She was sitting out there and things got in her eyes. Okay. Bring it back to the commission for action.
Madam Mayor, I move we accept the offered restricted access and easement dedications on the replat of Lot 1, Block 1 of the Salina Industrial Park subdivision.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to consider acceptance of offered restricted access and easement dedications on the replat of Lot 1, Block 1, Salina Industrial Park subdivision. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, other business.
Other business?
Do we have, are we doing other, are you gonna talk? Or are you gonna read?
You're going to read.
I'm going to read.
Okay, hang on, let me talk.
That's what I was okay.
Madam Mayor, Commissioners, I just wanted to pass along a little information that I think all of you would be very proud that over the weekend, NAACP had an annual block party up in North Salina for, I think, the third or fourth. Every year that
Every
Chief
year, yeah.
Nelson has been here, he has gone up there and cooked hot dogs and met with people and really, you know, has done a lot of community outreach. And I know everybody up there really appreciates it, and I think he has a good time. And I really just wanted to express the appreciation to not just Chief Nelson, but several police officers made it up there to visit with people, as well as about 4 members of the sheriff's, Saline County Sheriff's Deputy Patrol. So there was good presence out there, good outreach. I think it was a successful event. Dr. Davis, Commissioner Davis, showed the chief a few hot dog grilling techniques and then left. But it was a really good day. And then just a brief little update on our board positions. That depot redevelopment that the Bieberleys are doing. North Central Regional Planning Commission is working with them to help to hopefully secure grants for that and everything. And being on that board, I really think what they do is really good work up there. Doug McKinney and his staff do really good work. Just want to give a heads up that in October, around whatever the last Thursday in October is, might be around the 26th, they're having their North Central Regional Planning Commission meeting in Salina, and they haven't decided where the lunch is going to be and everything, but I told Doug that I would, and I'm sure he will, extend an invitation to all of you and to staff to come by and have lunch. And
They're a great bunch of folks.
yeah.
Really are. Okay.
We have a
Commissioner
conference
Davis.
room in the field house.
Are you going to read the motion for the executive session? I just had one other thing that I wanted to say. As a participant in Faith for a Cure, the Smoky Hill Street Fair, and the NAACP Block Party, I really want to give a shout out to Public Works and to law enforcement for their great handling of the closing of the streets and the opening of the streets and the making sure that everybody was going in the right direction. So thank you.
We do lots of parades in this
Yes.
town.
Yes, and that's all I have.
And it was a wonderful sea of purple going down towards Kansas Wesley.
Yes.
And
Was.
it was very nice. Will? I move that the City Commission recess into executive session to discuss contract negotiations with legal counsel pursuant to the attorney-client privilege communications with legal counsel exception, KSA 45-7319B2 for 30 minutes. The open meeting will resume in this room at 7:15.
Second.
Is there any business to come up after our executive session to come back out here for?
No, we do not expect any action.
Okay. Okay. Okay, a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay.